Hey, good morning, world. It's Patrick Lovell landing his 400 and what 49th truth bomb riff on the con on this Thursday, January 18th at approximately 9:30 my time. It's the kickoff to the 40th anniversary of the Sundance Film Festival, where a lot of great stuff's going to come our way and happen, and a lot of really stupid, ridiculous stuff as well. But not any more ridiculous than the world we live in. I opened up my New York Times this morning, of which I've been a subscriber for probably well over a decade. And, right there on the front page is the revelation that Pakistan retaliated. I guess the way it was written was ridiculously confusing, but retaliated against Iran for, I think, a strike that happened possibly yesterday. This on top of the growing regional conflict between, let's call it, everything stemming out of Gaza and ultimately, into Yemen with the Houthis, and then I guess Syria and Lebanon, and now Pakistan, and now back into Iran. But it was interesting to me because I was thinking, wow, wait a second. Iran is kind of like firing shots in all directions through proxies, but at the same time, kind of like, are they not aware that they're like right in the midst of being pincered or snared, kind of like Germany in the 14 through 18, and then again 1939 through 1945. I don't know. Maybe they're not thinking in terms of reality, but some strange stuff and ridiculous, like everything else. And what are these truth bomb riffs really? I mean, they're part lecture, they're part sermon, but really, you've got to think of me as if I were your best friend. And you're confused about things. And I'm like basically grabbing you by the shirt collar and I'm saying, listen to me. This is what you are not seeing. This is what you don't understand. And if somehow tens of millions of us could get on the same page, we'd be able to turn everything that's befuddling us upside down and inside out and right side up, more importantly, because we have to. And it's 2024 and there is no time to lose. So, what are the other ridiculous items that we might want to wrap our heads around in the nature of the moment to try to get through all of the distractions, even though they all come at a high cost and have significant ramifications, but to get to the truth of what it is that I'm trying to reveal to you? I guess the first topic that I should really endeavor is the nature of the economy. So, according to the Biden administration and everything that we continue to see come out through mainstream economists like Paul Krugman, is that, look, we've seen some of the best numbers that we've seen in literally decades. I think the unemployment numbers are at the level of the 60s, the late 60s, at the last time that the unemployment level was so low. And, there are other markers within the economy that supposedly translate to, hey, things are actually really good for most people. But yet most people know that's utterly nonsense. I mean, I can look around based on my own world and just see that a lot of people have many jobs, a lot of low paying jobs, and they have to work around the clock just to keep up with their own debt service, which is fascinating when you consider how the big guys do it. So, one aspect of our economy, and we got to think about, I mean, there's so many different components to the economy, whether it's energy, whether it's, material goods, whether it's agriculture, whether it's, medical, whether it's military industrial, whether it's fuel or energy or technology. I mean, what part of the economy are you in and what exactly is happening? Well, let's just say if you're in one of the big players in terms of those that are getting extremely rich and have been for now a very long time, might be in the commercial real estate market. But therein lies one of the revelations that reveal what it is that I'm trying to get you to understand. 60% of San Francisco real estate, commercial real estate, is unoccupied. And yet the homelessness in San Francisco is incredible. It's like The Walking Dead. I think we've all seen the pictures of the calamity of the tent cities and the drug problems and then the crime and the smash and grabs at storefronts and all of the rest of it. And you're kind of like, well, wait a second. San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the world. And yet there are so many people that are homeless and there's all this crime. how does that work when 60% of the commercial real estate in the office buildings in downtown San Francisco are available? Same with Manhattan. I believe I've read that you could fit, I mean, there's like, I don't want to quote the square footage that's available, but it could fill like 48 or more Empire State Buildings. And yet prices are still high. And yet people aren't going to their offices because things have changed post COVID, because most people are apparently working from home. But yet we've seen throughout the United States, especially if you live where I live, where commercial real estate has been absolutely incredible. And yet we still have a high level of homelessness. So you might be saying, well, Patrick, commercial real estate isn't residential real estate. They're not the same thing. Yeah, but what real estate developers put money in based on Fed policy, based on, how you can, turn money ultimately, and what's a good investment, is all in the same pot. And ultimately, the nature of why we've seen this explosive growth in commercial real estate prior to COVID, and then continuing through COVID, and then of course after COVID, given that most people are now working from home supposedly, is that the money went into commercial real estate because that's what was incentivized. But why are the prices so high if there's not a market and a demand to where they could actually justify how high the square footage, the appraised value of the building, of the rents, and so on and so forth? Well, that leads us right to what I've been talking about, which has been a subject of my truth bombs over the course of the last week, specifically as it relates to Donald Trump and his civil fraud trial in Manhattan. As you may recall, Donald Trump, one of the many scenarios that he is being indicted for, and that ultimately could lead to a potential $370 million fine because of the initiative of the state AG of New York in this fraud trial that could basically deliver the corporate death blow to the Trump enterprises in Manhattan. One of the reasons that they focused in on was that the appraised value of Donald Trump's assets, stemming from one notable example, was a penthouse in one of his buildings in which he hyperinflated the appraisal value, and then he also hyperinflated the square footage of the penthouse. It was just one example. The penthouse is just, as large as it is and amazing it is just a focal point of the entire building or the entire portfolio of all of his investments. But as I've shown you in previous truth bombs, and actually an interview I just did recently with William K. Black, that's on my YouTube website, YouTube website. It's not YouTube website. It's my YouTube page. It's Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con. Bill Black just basically unpacks all of the things that are involved with how Donald Trump's business practice is symptomatic of the entire enterprise, the entire industry, and what he does and why. And what we were revealing was the big trick, that it's actually him not pulling one over on the bank, because everybody in media keeps asking the question, well, look, the guy was lying on his loans to where he was hyperinflating the appraised value, and there's a process in terms of appraisals where you look at what the square footage value is compared to comparables of what's happening in the neighborhood. And it's really easy for somebody to do their due diligence, especially if they're providing loans in the multiple billions of dollars, to where they know that the square footage is exactly what it says in the loan documents and the appraised value is what it says. But of course they didn't. And the question is why? Well, because of what Bill Black has taught us, that a rolling loan knows no loss. And when you understand the dimensions of how banks lend and how CEOs make their money, you understand, or you get closer to understanding what we lay out to you in our provocative, profound, ridiculously important work, The Con, which you can find at www.thecon.tv, where we lay out why developers would increase the appraised value and increase the square footage and lie on the semantics of the details of what are into the deal, but more importantly, why banks would lend against that without doing due diligence. because they're making money to do it. They're incentivized to do it. They're not incentivized to get it exactly right. They're incentivized to do the deal. Why? Why would so much available inventory of real estate maintain such a high level of cost considering there is no demand? Well, in a capitalist country, that would be an impossibility. But that's what we're looking at. So what exactly is happening? If you've watched these truth bombs, if you've watched The Con, if you've heard my work in the New Untouchables, you'd know right away. But therein lies what these truth bombs are all about. Again, sermon, part, it's just me revealing to you what the truth is and me trying to shake out everything that's in your mind so that you can understand what reality is in 2024 and what we have to do to change the calculus. We, you and me, we the people, because the system itself has been incentivized to destroy us, to kick us to the curb, to kick us to the garbage, that we're expendable. But why can they do this? Are we not a capitalist country? Isn't it all about supply and demand? Isn't it all about the best and brightest amongst us doing their due diligence, being out in front of everybody to dictate terms that create the winners in our society? Isn't that what we're supposed to be? Especially those of you who are enamored with Donald Trump, those of you who wear red hats, and those of you who call yourselves MAGAs. Aren't you anti-socialist? Don't you hate the idea of the welfare queen? Don't you despise government intervention? Don't you despise anybody getting a handout? Well, then why would you support Donald Trump? Because he's the ultimate socialist in this Griftopia universe that we've created, that I'm trying to shake you out of the cloud of your dystopia to make you see the light of truth. What is the con? Well, what we revealed in the con, that we spent $4.5 million to bring to market, that everybody in market that were the gatekeepers quashed because they can't have you understand the truth. That we've all been getting played. That everything is upside down, inside out, perverted, and a lie. And that's what we're in the midst of. And what happens, just like Jon Snow said in Game of Thrones in season 6, when he addressed Cersei and everybody, basically at the round table, trying to get them to see the existential threat of the army of the dead, when asked whether or not in his, bid for loyalties in terms of the political game between him and Cersei and Daenerys and all of the rest of it, he said, when you live in a world of lies, all you get are better and better lies. And there is no end to that. And it accomplishes nothing. And I won't bend the knee to that, which leads to his character being the symbiosis of integrity. And that's who Jon Snow was throughout the entirety of the madness of Game of Thrones, which is what I am in terms of the madness of our reality in the ocean of lies. And so Donald Trump would increase the square footage on his properties, on his assets, to increase the appraised value, because he could lend against that, and he was making money from bank loans that were guaranteed for a whole bunch of different reasons, but primarily because the one lender that would lend to him at that time was doing what everybody else was doing. And it's just amazing how bad Donald Trump was, because he couldn't get loans from anybody else, but he got loans from Deutsche Bank. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily, Deutsche Bank had also been fined eventually for laundering billions upon billions of dollars for Vladimir Putin and Russia and Russian oligarchs. Oh yeah, they were a direct pipeline to Donald Trump. But that's not the only reason. That has a big part to do, that has a lot to do with it, but that's not the only reason. It's because banks learned a long time ago that you can refinance. A rolling loan knows no loss. How do bankers get paid? They get paid on doing deals, and they get paid on doing a lot of deals. And as long as they can package and they can bundle those deals into securities, then they can sell it upstream to investors, no harm, no foul, because they weren't on the hook for the loans failing. It didn't matter. It's called control fraud. But ultimately, this formula has been going on for decades. And we've done it to the tune of tens of millions of assets in the real estate structure through mortgage-backed securities that we sold upstream to all manner, shape, or form of investors that include pensions, that include sovereign wealth funds, and a whole variety of things. But when it all collapsed because of all of the lies that were confangled together to create the entirety of this assembly line of fraud that starts with origination, that goes through underwriting, that goes through appraised values, that go through the lending apparatus, through high yield spread premiums that go into the AAA rubber stamps of the credit rating agencies, all the way through securities and then derivatives, which creates a global paradigm of derivatives. You actually have a market that, in the case of the housing market in 2008, was $4.5 trillion that morphed into an $800 trillion derivatives market, all predicated on a sawdust of lies. I know, yeah, millions of you, like me, bought into it. Now, by the time I was into it, I was actually working as someone producing television shows that were basically promulgating loans and houses. I was part of the grift. I didn't even know it, but I was getting paid six figures at the time to do it. And so I had the money on my honest lending mortgage application that I was probably one of the few that didn't lie across the board, but I got into the game, but I had income. And so, yeah, I could check off all the boxes of what it is that they're required for you to be able to get a loan. You know, Donald Trump's been through 6 bankruptcies. I think this will be a 7th. Or if you consider Jean Carroll, in her defamation suit and things that are going to follow in the path of like what happened to Giuliani. I mean, we might see 7 or 8 different bankruptcies. But going back to the commercial real estate situation, you might think to yourself, well, wait a second, don't these huge institutions that buy large real estate investments, aren't they on the hook just like the rest of us? Yeah, but they've got accountants and they've got attorneys and they do what they're called LLCs that can go bankrupt, that, the company itself doesn't go bankrupt. They're holding companies for these different situations. But herein lies the big aha about why, if you support Donald Trump, for example, and believe you're a bootstrap capitalist, that you're actually a socialist or supporting socialism. And you got played, sucker. Is that the guys up on top, because of the way the banks are operating, because of rolling loan knows no loss, because of the control fraud, because of modern executive compensation, to the CEOs who make money on massive, massive, massive loans that, give this facade of increased profits through these time periods of bubbles to the investors of all the portfolios of these companies and these too big to fail apparatuses, that when they all failed, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, configured emergency lending apparatuses to create liquidity for them to continue doing this, while simultaneously, through quantitative easing, which many people, economists, describe as low interest rates for long periods of time, but you're not seeing who's buying the treasuries and so forth. And ultimately, the Federal Reserve purchased the mortgage-backed securities that were created illegally to the tune of $16 trillion. So what we reveal to you, what I reveal to you, what I'm the only guy in the country revealing to you, is that the Federal Reserve used its capacity of the lender of last resort through the statute Federal Reserve Act 13.3, provided illegally based on its own statutes, because you don't loan to insolvent institutions, especially those that got their bankrupted through bankruptcy because of fraud. It's just fucking ridiculous. But because you don't understand all of the elements that are involved, you can't see the forest for the trees. Again, it's like if you're my best friend and you're waiting on, I don't know, like for years an increase in your salary, and I know all the reasons why it's never going to happen, and I'm trying to reveal that to you so that you can move on, you should listen to me. Or if maybe your spouse is cheating on you and you've got you suspect it, you've got an inkling that something is going on or something is foul, but you can't put it together and you're miserable as a result of it, and I give you all of the details that make you go, aha. Well, you're better equipped to make a decision so that you can move on and you can live your life in a much more fruitful way as opposed to being under the grip of some sort of poisonous thing that's absolutely destroying you. And that's what I'm doing here. And again, it's socialism. My shortcut is we don't live in a democracy. We haven't lived in a democracy for decades. We live in a corporate fascist state. I use that because it's redundant to make the point. By the way, if you understand fascism, you understand it came out of Mussolini's Italy, and it was the superstructure of the corporate state, which is fascism. Yeah, it leans right wing and it's totalitarian and it's top down and patriarchal typically, and it has a bunch of characteristics. But corporations, which have absolute autonomy for the CEO and the board, operate in much the same fashion. So we are not a democracy. We're a corporate fascist state because these systems, through Citizens United and dark money, they own our politicians, which is the easiest low-hanging fruit and best ROI that you can imagine, because if you write the government's laws, you're writing it for the corporations, or in this case, the financial system that got away with stealing tens of trillions of dollars, which leads me to my next point. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate, which is literally the mafia. Do you know what the mafia does? It's organized crime. You've all seen the movies. You know what they do. They might, lean on store keepers to, pay an upside that they loot off the top for protection. That might be the baseline. They might be involved with, leveraging politicians and getting them involved with some sort of sex antics, aka Jeffrey Epstein, so that they can make sure that they do the laws so that they're not touched by the police and they pay off the police and there's grift in every single direction. That's the mafia. That's what our financial system and our corporate structure has done to our government. You're not a democracy. You're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses, and this is the big aha, socialism. Our central bank provides tens of trillions of dollars to a system continuously that can go bankrupt through LLCs that you don't see because of the way we create these apparatuses to reduce the risk so that investors can be guaranteed, which ultimately our Federal Reserve is doing, and the FDIC and everything else, for everything that when you kill the golden goose, you don't have the capacity of a middle class to be able to have the consumption model that everything else is a myth that these higher ups are skimming from, which is what they're doing. That's part of the whole scheme of control fraud. And ultimately, you're a corporate fascist state that uses socialism to guarantee the mafiocracy, which is just the antithesis of capitalism. There's no risk reward here. There's no risk. And there's just nothing but reward through theft, through stealing. And now it's literally fueling fascism. It's just all a goddamn ginormous trick. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about continual and perpetual wars, if we're talking about the climate, if we're talking about any vestige of power, prison industrial complex, policing, all the rest of it, it's all tied to this stuff. And the only ones making bank from it are the top 1% through all of these variables that I'm revealing to you, all of these tricks. And it's 2024. We've known about this stuff since the 80s. In fact, we had a savings and loan crisis where William K. Black put in prison over 1,000 high-level executives that were involved with what we call phase one of this control fraud in this modern era. It's the most sophisticated era of what we've seen through financialization since the 80s onwards to now. But by the time we got to the late 80s, we basically got rid of the law for the upside. And that was all a combination of continuity from what Reagan started through Bush Sr., but ultimately through Clinton, and definitely carried through from Bush Jr. But Clinton was at the apex of this thing when he got rid of all the laws that we learned after the Great Depression to ultimately make all of this stuff an impossibility. But since Clinton got rid of it, and of course you can make judgments on Clinton Foundation and Epstein and everything else, but he got rid of regulation. They created what we call the 3 Ds: deregulation, desupervision, decriminalization, that created a runaway train wreck of corruption and fraud. And fraud is not shenanigans. Fraud is theft by deception, and they're felonies. People go to jail for fraud all the time, just not CEOs of giant corporations. We give them tens of trillions of dollars to make an economy that makes no sense. So, what are you going to do about it? So, think about me, Patrick Lovell, a muckraking journalist who had to go the distance for America, who sacrificed everything to be able to get these truths to you, while the $90 billion a year apparatus of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Reserve, but I didn't include that $90 billion a year to include whatever the mechanics of regulation of the Federal Reserve is supposed to be, but it includes the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the FBI, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which are supposed to be the police, the cops on the beat for the financial system. Because just like criminals on the sidewalk, they're stealing from, quite frankly, widows, and there's a absolute art to that, and they can make trillions upon trillions of dollars doing it, which is what we learned in the savings and loan crisis, and it just got worse all the way through the dot-com scenario, through the Enron era frauds, and then ultimately cataclysm took place in the 2008 great financial crisis. But what we've been living with since is just the band-aids that pieced all this together, and this apparatus, what we call a tetrahedron, or I think it's a tetrahedron. You got to think of it as a multidimensional pyramid of bad actors that include the legal system, that include accountants, that can include professionals like crazy that are looting from the system. That is basically what we are. And what I say is corruption burns and fuels fascism. So when I opened up the New York Times this morning and I saw that Pakistan had retaliated against Iran for some attack that I was unaware of, in context to all of the broadening regional conflict from the Houthis in Yemen and all the stuff in Gaza, and of course what could happen in Syria and Lebanon and a broader war, to me, it was insanely confusing because I don't know what the dynamics are between Iran and Pakistan. But it got me thinking about a lot of stuff. But still, at the same time, it's all a reaction to the situation of this global paradigm that I'm revealing to you, that runs global capital flows that are extracted from countries all over the world into our financial system, and we're the world's global reserve currency that enables us to do this. And then, of course, there's talk about the breakaway regimes of, let's call it the BRIC countries that are going to possibly remove us as the world's reserve currency. I don't see it happening in my lifetime. But if they do, then we're going to collapse anyway. And so why am I revealing all of this information to you? And by the way, one thing I wanted to say at the outset here is, if it's not enough that I couldn't get this out to mainstream through HBO, which was what my intent was, my objective, but I couldn't because it got squashed, even though I was in the business of, being represented by one of the top agencies in Hollywood. But at the end of the day, what I'm revealing is what the system can't have you know. So, for example, because of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 and the tens of trillions of dollars that got illegally, created to all of these entities that were bankrupt, the facilitator of all was a giant company that a lot of people that are idiots, like Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and many others of that in that sort of space, are actually putting as the evil guys, the evildoers behind the scenes, which they really are, but they don't understand how they got that way and what they're doing, which I'm revealing to you. BlackRock, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who came out of the S&L crisis, who cleaned it up through the Resolution Trust, who had this software called Aladdin. The government, Timothy Geithner, Secretary of Treasury, put them at the apex of this because Goldman Sachs was in a lot of trouble at the time because of Matt Taibbi's work. And they ultimately became the facilitators of the tens of trillions of dollars that came through the Federal Reserve. So they picked and they got to pick and choose who the winners would be and who the losers would be. And out of all of those sort of entities, it included the likes of HBO. Yeah, they became the largest shareholders in Netflix and HBO, and they sit on the boards of everybody because they're the ones funneling the money for these things to exist. And they're like, the hell if you're going to reveal how the system works on a platform that we just saved. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I have to break through. And we spent $4.5 million to get the $33 trillion truth that happened in 2009 that's now morphed north of $70 trillion. How do I get to that number? You have another $16 trillion in quantitative easing. That puts the number at 49 trillion. There was another 22 trillion in emergency lending through this repo run in 2019 before COVID. So 22 trillion and 69 trillion is what? Let's call it 50 plus 15. So somewhere in the 65 trillion range. And that was before COVID. So yeah, it's easily north of $70 trillion to a tiny fraction of society that gets to puppeteer everybody else. And so my colleagues and I are creating a path to the Clean New Deal. That is our resurrection. That is our redemption. I laid out that corruption births and fuels fascism. It's got the grips of tens of millions of you. The only people that are making out like this are the people that have endless money from the Federal Reserve to be able to loot and basically make, fees from socialism, because it's the Federal Reserve that's purchasing and guaranteeing, and they have been for years. Apparently, they're not doing it nearly as much now, but although I couldn't give you a forensic an analysis of where we are in the whole QT transition, which means quantitative tightening. But I know that the Federal Reserve was paying $180 billion a month for years for mortgage-backed securities and also commercial-backed securities. So developers put investors together. They build these buildings that go empty, that they keep hyperinflated because the government, through the Federal Reserve, and that's a misnomer as well, because a lot of you are like, well, wait a second, the Federal Reserve is independent, it doesn't work for the government. But many of you are like, no, the federal government is in control of the Federal Reserve, and that's the whole point of the Federal Reserve. But it's not. That is the whole point. The Federal Reserve's mandate is to have low inflation and high employment. But high employment for what? 3 jobs to where 90% of the people, 95% of the people are just banking of enough money to barely keep their lips afloat, to hopefully hang on by their fingertips to a house that's hyperinflated because of all of the stuff that I'm talking about, that the Fed already purchased the mortgage-backed securities, so the developer already got his money. All of these other things are just upside, okay? And the bank ultimately owns all of it. Why? Because the bank is what gets free money from the Fed. And then, by the way, banks can actually loan money into existence like that against Fed money, loans from the Fed that they can borrow at 0%. So when the interest rate goes up, then everything falls apart. And that's what's happening in commercial real estate. So there's going to be, on top of all of the other insanity that's taking place between MAGA and Trump and the 91 indicted, guy running, to outlast the law so that he doesn't go to prison, so that he can do deals like he has all along, with his son-in-law getting another, $4 billion from Saudi Arabia, the country that got away with 9/11, and then his former Secretary of the Treasury, another $2 billion, when everybody on MAGA wants to be like, oh my God, look at the corruption of Biden. But that's not to say that Biden's not corrupt. He's just not playing at the level that your boy Trump is. Not to mention everything that Trump's involved with. The 91 indictments of Donald Trump reveal exactly what I'm trying to reveal to you, that the government is demonstrating that Donald Trump basically defrauded the United States using racketeering, documentation fraud to steal the election, and using, corrupt judges and attorneys to do it. Yeah, that's exactly what the financial system did by burying tens of millions of people illegally, while illegally stealing tens of trillions of dollars. There's no story bigger than this. And the reason why I'm just laying this out there and I'm just going off on this truth bomb riff today, I got kicked off of X for the 7th time this year because of a comment that I made on an Alex Jones thread, where I said, every time I see you, Alex, it looks like you're about to have a heart attack. That came back to me as that I violated some rule of, violence. Are you kidding me? Compared to what we see 1,000 times an hour on X, I got booted from X because I challenged Alex Jones. Not challenged Alex Jones. I just said what we're all thinking. The guy looks like, and it just cracks me up. And maybe I look like it now, but I could never in a million years get to the level that Alex Jones does, because that's what Alex Jones is this fat face, purple, insane machine of just words. And he gets hyper, and it looks like his head's going to explode and he's going to have a heart attack. I just said what everybody's already thinking. I didn't say I hope he's going to have a heart attack. I didn't say that somebody should facilitate something to give you a heart attack. I didn't incite violence. I didn't suggest that he should die by way of some sort of nefarious, conspiratorial sort of thing, that they actually violated the rules. No, they just want to quash me because 90%, not 90%, Whatever it was, it's probably 100%. Elon Musk is part of the same socialism. Elon Musk wouldn't be the richest man of the world if it wasn't for the federal government of the United States on every single sector, especially what I'm revealing to you on the Fed. The net worth of billionaires doubled during COVID. Again, if you're somebody who thinks about the market and the free market and capitalism and everything else, how many people were lining up to buy Teslas at the time of COVID? No, it was a stock price that was increasing because of front running and extra money, they say, because of, people getting checks, stimulus checks, but nobody was buying fucking Tesla stock because they got $1,600 for their family. They might have been through PPP loan fraud or, sitting on their, couches while they were getting paid their full, salary, so that they were throwing money into, things like Tesla. That's part of it, and front running and everything else that this whole system does. But that's what they do, man. It's a runaway, and it's just they're gang raping the middle class. And so what are we trying to do? What are you listening to me for? Why am I shaking you out of this, hysteria of dystopia so that you can understand how the system works? Because we, the people, have got to rise in unison by the tens of millions, and I've got the answers to be able to do that in service of two things. We've got to be able to elevate all of the findings that I've revealed to you in both the Con at www.thecon.tv and the new Untouchables, and then we've got to elevate that into a literal congressional investigation to hold the CEOs of Wall Street accountable for what they've gotten away with for now 15 years. That's where it starts. And then second, you have to understand, the American people, that we've given over $70 trillion to this many people. That's not an economy. That's not a democracy. That's not capitalism. That's moral hazard on steroids, on Godzilla X steroids. And what we have to do is we've got to translate in your understanding that, okay, well, you know what? Just to be fair, if these guys got away with $70 trillion over 15 years, how about we spend $70 trillion on the real economy for the next 15 years and see what that does? Because we could easily manifest a transition away from fossil fuels, get out of wars for at least until we recreate democracy in the United States. For me, it's like, why would we export democracy when we don't have a democracy here? Because there is no democracy. It's a global cabal, which Alex Jones would call the New World Order, and he's not wrong about that, but he is wrong about everything else, as is Tucker Carlson, as is everybody. And I know that all of the people that are so frustrated and befuddled and completely confused by the system that swing Trump, because they know that 4 decades, because they had their pensions destroyed and all of those other things, they had decades and decades of what we call neoliberalism and the Clinton establishment, and they can't stand it, so they're going to go with the guy that's bucking the system, but they're going with the guy that is the system. But again, if you are all in on him, you got to understand that the government is demonstrating that he is, a small player, but he's guilty of everything that the entire system is guilty of. And what are we going to do? Well, you got to do the investigation. You got to then show the American people that $70 trillion was looted from the full faith and credit of the United States, of a government of, by, and for the people, for a government of, by, and for the corrupt corporations. And then we've got to purge it all, because that's what this is a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism it fuels, to redeem democracy, to redeem the American dream, to resurrect the American dream. Because all we have to do is slightly change the paradigm into a whole renewable energy platform. And I'd like to use my renewable bulldozer to steamroll over guys like Vivek Ramaswamy, who are nothing but liars, who are now butt-licking Trump, butt-licking, boot-licking, and so on and so forth. And all of them are doing the same thing. Guys, it's ridiculous how corrupt we are. It's ridiculous how deceptive we are. It's ridiculous that 90% of you are taking this lying down. It's not what it is to be an American. That's not who we are. We are people that are like, what's up, Doc? And we're people who fight back. And we're people who come together for the right. Do the right thing. Sorry to quip into Spike Lee world. But that's what we've got to do. And we've got to break through the walls of censorship of the right of Elon Musk and the lies that he perpetuates through all of this ridiculousness that X is all about. But they're just an extension of all of the other insanity that's taken place since the country completely went through a coup d'etat in 2009, before the coup d'etat of 2020, and we're a failed state. And we don't have to be. If you come together with me and millions of us join, then we'll basically be able to break this thing to kingdom come. Oh my God, I wanted this to be smoother. I wanted it to be shorter. It's not great, but don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I don't know if anybody will see this. Look, man, if you can, we got to raise money for this endeavor, because I got to take this information to the American people. I want to create a Lollapalooza-like tour where I take all of this information. I am the producer. That's what I am. I'm the producer. And we've got an idea of getting this information in front of the American people so that we can create and find the right American presidential candidate to run on everything that we reveal, to do everything that I just said. Because if you have a presidential candidate that gets into office, then you can initiate on your own through the executive branch this investigation, and you can do it through the DOJ, and you can bust this all up, and you can use the bully pulpit. And we've got to do it that way, because just people are so easily manipulated in parties and corrupted that nobody's going to do this. We've got to have, a savior, quite frankly, in the presidency to do this. And also, my God, what they're up against with the Supreme Court and everything else. I mean, Trump is just the race to the bottom in the gutter and the sewer for corruption. He's the nail in the coffin of what the United States is if we don't defeat the tyranny of this misery. But we can do that together. And ultimately, I need to ask you to kick in $13. Kick in $13, share the word, join us, spread the word, get involved, and help us create this populist crusade to purge corruption, the fascism, fuels, because there's no time left. And the only way we're going to do this, and I should have mentioned this, my whole hope is to rally enough people to where we create, enough attention to where everybody's starting to pay attention to us. And then once people start to understand the truths that we have an opportunity to connect with guys like Shawn Fain, president of the UAW, who I have seen in interviews say almost everything that I'm saying in a much more watered down version, but he gets, the cliff notes, and he understands basically intuitively what's going on because he sees it. But he's also, in front of 1 million members of UAW. And we got to have somebody like him come into the fold, because like I said, if we can show the American people that $70 trillion has gone to this corrupt engine to basically destroy us and create the situation that we're all in the midst of, that could, the ceiling could drop in on us, the floor could drop out, whatever analogy you want, really in the next year of the economy, which is a serious possibility. And if that happens, then we're off to 1930s Germany, which we're kind of already in. But a guy like Shawn Fain would understand that we have to reboot the golden goose, which is American manufacturing. We've got to recreate the paradigm. We've got to recreate our infrastructure. We've got to recreate the renewable energy paradigm so that we're no longer, using the heroin of Saudi Arabia that got away with 9/11, if I have to remind you. There's just so much to it, but yet it's really so simple in the end. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. And when you have the truth, you're bulletproof. So please, with me, rise, roar, revolt. That failure is not an option. This is the righteous grind, people. Onwards and upwards.